To be entirely honest, I think she's full of shit. It's been a while since I've made a full-length book review video, but it's also been a while since I've read a book that left me scratching my head as much as this one has. Today, we're talking about the best-selling recent release, Sociopath, a memoir by Patric Gagne. Quick background for those who are new around here. My training as a writer is in creative nonfiction and specifically memoir and personal essay. So I want to review this book not only as a reader, but also examine it from the perspective of a writer because, spoiler alert, I do not think this is a successful memoir, and I have a lot of reasons as to why. I first heard about Sociopath shortly after its publication earlier this year in April, when I came across an interview with the author on the YouTube channel Book Break. The big selling point of this memoir is the fact that Gagne is a psychologist who's also been diagnosed as a sociopath. So naturally, I had to Google her, and was quite surprised to find that I didn't find almost any information on her background as a psychologist, and no evidence that she's ever published any peer-reviewed research. Now, I'm not a psychologist, clearly, and I thought, maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places on Google. I don't really know where doctors publish things, so surely the memoir will make everything clear. Incorrect. I am now more confused than before I read the book. Upon further digging, I did discover that Patric Gagne is a bit of a pen name. Her real name is Patricia Cagle, but that did not yield any results either. I also found that the school that awarded her doctorate, the California Graduate Institute, was not accredited by the APA during the time that she studied, although there are documents that say she did in fact receive a doctorate there. So I don't really know what to make of any of that. Typically, I don't care this much about a memoirist's professional credentials, but I do in this case because Gagne is being presented as an expert. PhD title is on the cover for a reason. It's to add an air of authority to the writer as a marketing tool. As mentioned earlier, a doctor saying she's a sociopath is going to sell way more books than any regular old person saying they're a sociopath. As a reader, I'm putting my trust in this writer that she's being truthful, and I expect her background to hold up. Some of you may remember the absolute scandal that was the memoir A Million Little Pieces, written by James Frey in 2003. I was too young to be aware of it at the time, but long story short, the book told what was thought to be the true story of Frey's experience with addiction. Oprah Winfrey endorsed it and selected it for her book club, and afterwards it became a big bestseller. In 2006, a year after Frey appeared on The Oprah Show, an investigative website called The Smoking Gun revealed much of the book was fabricated, and so Oprah and the book world in general flipped their lids. The scandal had nothing to do with how well the memoir was written, and everything to do with the fact that millions of readers trusted Frey to tell them a true story, and felt betrayed when they learned that most of it was a lie. Truth is going to be the theme of this review, because creative nonfiction has exactly one rule: never break the reader's trust that what you are saying is true. Now, there is a fair amount of leniency to this rule, because memoirs reflect on the past, and human memory is fallible. Of course, you're not going to remember every word from a conversation you had 20 years ago. You're not going to remember every little detail of your childhood. There's a great creative nonfiction craft book I recommend, Tell It Slant by Brenda Miller, and the title comes from an Emily Dickinson poem. The line goes, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. And the idea is essentially in essays, in memoir, tell the truth, but there's a little bit of wiggle room to account for the fallibility of memory and give you a little bit of creative license. That said, there is a line where creative license turns into fiction, and I do believe Gagne crossed it. The prime suspect in this situation is the sheer amount of conversation Gagne recounts. Just about every chapter of the memoir includes at least one very long, very detailed, often highly intellectual conversation that I just have a really hard time believing most of them really happened. Again, I'm not expecting perfection. I don't have a problem if you have to fill in a few gaps here and there, if you merge a few different conversations into one, etc., etc. But the dialogue in Sociopath was so dense, so specific, that it planted a little seed of doubt in my mind and raised my suspicions about the authenticity of the narrative as a whole. Suspect number 2 is the series of highly sensationalized and glamorized events that take place throughout the book. Early on, Gagne criticizes the way our society sensationalizes sociopathy, specifically how evil, villainous characters in media are often called sociopaths. She wants us to shift our perception of the term and realize that sociopaths can be, and often are, normal, functioning members of society. Quick side note, we will be talking more about the issues with this term in a few minutes, but right now I'm using it just because the author does. But Gagne does a lot of sensationalizing of her own. There are several scenes of her, flying down the California coast in stolen cars and breaking into abandoned houses with her friends, and mentions of how everyone around her thinks she is just so cool. Most notable was her time working in the music industry as a manager. Many of the later chapters focused on her not exactly platonic relationship with some anonymous music legend, a big star that we definitely all know, but she's gonna keep him anonymous. And I cannot leave out the scene where Gagne attends a party at the Playboy Mansion, breaks into Hugh Hefner's office, calls her friend from his phone, and then steals his notebook. So no, she's not making herself out to be some evil villain, but you don't get a whole lot more glamorized or sensationalized than that. Also, why are you so proud to be hobnobbing with Hugh Hefner? Of course, I can neither confirm nor deny the extent to which these events were true, but given that the book's dialogue already felt unrealistic and over the top, this added element of star-studded glamour increases my suspicions even more. More importantly, it tells me that Gagne is not really as concerned with decreasing the stigma around an ignored and misunderstood diagnosis, as she claims, but rather with talking about herself and reveling in her own naughtiness. Look at me, I'm such a quirky sociopath. But real quick, if you've made it this far into this review/deep dive, do consider hitting that subscribe button. This is Thought Couture, I'm Kelsey Jo, and I publish new videos just about every week on book recommendations, book reviews, creative writing content, and bookish commentary. Now, we need to talk about what is the most egregious and frankly infuriating thing about Sociopath: the diagnosis itself. As you may or may not know, sociopathy has been a hotly contested diagnosis within psychology for decades and is no longer clinically recognized. It was removed from the DSM in 1968, and now a patient presenting with symptoms of apathy and a lack of remorse would probably be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder instead. To my non-professional knowledge, those with ASPD may be called sociopaths, colloquially, but I don't believe they are interchangeable diagnoses.
Also, I forgot to mention that Gagne claims she was not eligible for an ASPD diagnosis because she did not have a criminal record. Even though she was breaking the law, she had just never got caught. I can't find any source now that says if someone needs an actual criminal record to be considered for ASPD, but regardless, her doctor at the time did not think she qualified for that.
I want to preface this section by saying that none of us have the right to diagnose a stranger with anything just by reading their book, nor do I think we have the right to tell someone else how they should understand themselves and what terms to use for themselves. Although after reading the book, I don't personally believe Gagne has sociopathy, but ultimately I'm less annoyed by the fact of her possibly incorrect diagnosis and more annoyed with how she got there and how she wrote about it. As for why I don't think Gagne is a sociopath, I have two main reasons. The first being that much of the behavior she describes actually sounds a lot to me like autism. Most notably, Gagne recounts how, as a child, she would study other people's facial expressions and body language, tone of voice, things like that, practice them, and then perform them the next time she had a social interaction. Again, I'm not a doctor, nor am I myself autistic, but to my limited knowledge, this sounds pretty much exactly like the process of masking that I've heard a lot of people with autism describe. Plus, Gagne was born in 75, I believe, and a solid understanding of how autism presents in girls and women wasn't really much of a thing until very recently, so it would make sense that no one was looking for autism or thinking about it when she was seeking a diagnosis. The second reason is that Gagne claims the hallmark of her sociopathy is the fact that she doesn't care what other people think of her. Except she very clearly does. Throughout the book, she expresses disappointment and anger when she finds out that people are taking advantage of her lack of remorse or staying friends with her just because they think sociopathy is novel and cool. More importantly, much of the last section of the book focuses on her relationship with her then boyfriend, now husband David, and she very obviously loves him a lot and is hurt when he doesn't understand her sociopathy or doesn't let her, and I quote, fully lean into her dark side. So on that note, I need to point out to her that your boyfriend not wanting you to break the law, hurt someone, or land your ass in jail is a very reasonable request. So all of this made me wonder, why is Gagne so focused on being a sociopath, even if she herself admits that she doesn't perfectly fit the definition? I still don't know. And what truly bugged me about the memoir is Gagne's utter refusal to consider any other possibility, to the extent that she laughs off all the decades of research that suggest sociopathy is not a legitimate diagnosis. In fact, I very nearly DNF'd the book when she states, and I quote, again, all the research is bullshit. But why? Why is it bullshit, Patricia? The only reason she gives us is because it doesn't tell her exactly what she wants to hear. And look, I do understand and agree that there is an arbitrary nature to what conditions get to be called diagnoses and what the definitions of them are. At the end of the day, the DSM is really a group of men in a room making decisions. But let's have that conversation. Let's dive deep into the DSM creation process and not just blow it all off because you don't like it. As mentioned, I can't tell Gagne that she can't call herself a sociopath, especially if that term is truly what feels right in her heart and resonates with her. But from a writing perspective, this refusal to even briefly consider any other possibility again undermines the reader's trust. It shows that Gagne isn't interested in exploring and discovering the truth, but rather that she's already made up her mind as to what the truth is and expects us to just believe her because she said so. It would have been entirely possible to write the same memoir while remaining open to other possibilities and still arrive at the same conclusion. In that case, we could have followed Gagne on her path to understanding herself, rather than witness her force everyone around her to confirm what she already believes. Sociopath is the kind of memoir that makes memoirists look bad. Good memoir does not fabricate events, does not sensationalize sensitive topics, and most certainly doesn't spend the entire book with its head shoved far inside its own ass. A good memoir is essentially truthful, is open-minded, and willing to explore what makes the writer uncomfortable. A good memoir is more concerned with what it can do for the reader than what it can do for the writer. If you want a great example of a memoir about mental health and psychology, I highly recommend another recent release, Committed by Suzanne Scanlon. While it has a similarly attention-grabbing hook of the writer's experience in a mental institution, Scanlon does a far better job of really teasing out the nature and the implications of her experience, and expands beyond her own point of view to discuss other female writers who had similar mental health issues. It was one of my favorite books so far this year, and it really succeeds in every way that Gagne failed. Overall, I find Sociopath and its author weird, to say the very least. I don't trust her one bit, honestly, and I actually fell down a little rabbit hole while researching her and found that no one, apparently, has any idea, where this woman came from or what she's been doing for the past, 15 to 20 years. It's all very odd. There are more details that you could look up. I just couldn't get into it all today. That was beyond the scope of my video. I predict that Gagne will sell a bunch of books, make a bunch of money, and then we will never hear from her again. Well, that is it for me today. I would love to know if you read Sociopath or what did you think of it. If not, do you have any memoir recommendations you'd like to share? I would love to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll also enjoy this video that YouTube chose specifically for you. As always, thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.